Majnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitanjena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Well, here we are for our Thursday online Sangha, our international group around the world. And yesterday, of course, was a very significant day for us. It was marking the anniversary of our Gurudev's departure from this world, which is a day of many mixed feelings. Actually, in Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's this one chapter which describes the passing of Haridas Thakur, right, who's famous as the distributor of the holy name. He was actually the first pioneer of spreading the holy name, even before Mahaprabhu. And so he's known as the Namacharya. And you know, he was so dear to Mahaprabhu. And there's a whole chapter which is describing his departure from this world. And it's in, you know, on one level, it's very beautifully describing the love that Mahaprabhu had for Haridas Thakur, his relationship with him. But it's also seen as symbolic of the love that the Lord has for his devotees as a whole, and also the significance of the passing of a Vaishnava, a great Vaishnava from this world. And that chapter is often recited, so I've heard, it's often recited when a great Vaishnava is being put into samadhi. And there are some things in there which, you know, we remember, you know, in relation to our Gurudev's passing from this world. You know, there's one beautiful verse there saying that Haridas Thakur, he was the crown jewel of this world. And now that he has left, you know, the world has become bereft of such a great jewel. It doesn't translate so well into English, but it's much sweeter in Bengali. And Gurudev quoted that verse in relation to Srila Sridhar Maharaj. And we also think of Srila Govinda Maharaj in that way, that he was such an effulgent presence in this world, like a shining jewel. And actually, you know, we understand that the presence of such great souls in this world, it is affecting the world in ways that we may not even be aware of, you know, because they hold such a pure, bright presence in this world. It's actually counteracting so much negativity, so much ignorance, so much darkness in this world. And so his, you know, consciously or unconsciously, you know, his absence, his departure from this world is something that affected the whole planet, you know. That is how we see it. And then there's also this other expression in that chapter about Haridas Thakur, how it's a very beautiful, that chapter describing how Mahaprabhu personally arranges for Haridas Thakur's samadhi and personally arranges for a festival of prasad distribution after he leaves. And then at the end it mentions, you know, how Mahaprabhu had these mixed feelings of happiness and sorrow, right? At the end, when he went to take rest at the end of the day, you know, remembering Haridas Thakur, you know, feeling so much joy in remembering his great qualities, but then also feeling sadness in the separation of such a great soul. And so, you know, we, in our small way, you know, we have some mixed feelings like that, you know. It is mentioned in also in Chaitanya Charitamrita, in the discussion between Mahaprabhu and his beloved associate Ramananda Rai. There's this question and answer session that goes on towards the end of their meeting, and Mahaprabhu asks him, one of his questions is, what's the greatest sorrow in this world? What's the greatest suffering in this world? And Haridas Thakur, Ramananda Rai responds, the separation from a Vaishnava. And it's interesting because he doesn't say separation from Krishna. That's what you would expect, right? But he says separation from the Vaishnava. That is the greatest suffering in this world. To have it is mentioned also in the scriptures, the rarity of meeting a pure devotee and having their associations. When Mahaprabhu meets with Sanatan Goswami, when Sanatan Goswami's like a fugitive of the government, he's escaped from his government service and he's very dirty and ragged, and Mahaprabhu wants to embrace him, but Sanatan is very shy, backing away. And Mahaprabhu tells him, what is the purpose of these eyes but to see the Vaishnava, see such a pure Vaishnava as you? What is the purpose of my hands but to embrace you? What is the only purpose of all of my senses is to have the association of such a great Vaishnava such as yourself. And so similarly, we can think, having come in connection with Srila Govinda Maharaj, and even those who couldn't physically meet him, but to know about him, to know that such a great soul existed, that is the perfection of our existence, that our mentally, verbally, physically, that we can connect with him. We can remember him, we can try to serve him, we can try to glorify him, and we can try to follow his instructions. That is the perfection of our human birth. and we want to try to remember that. And I've been reflecting a lot these last few days, how, when Srila Govinda Maharaj left this world, it was like a disaster had struck. It was the greatest disaster. And I remember at one point, I think maybe it was a few days after he left, I thought to myself, well, the one good thing is that the worst thing has already happened. Like nothing worse could happen than this. I don't have to worry about any great disaster because there couldn't be any greater tragedy, any greater disaster than this, that Srila Govinda Maharaj would leave. And so it was, there was that type of feeling, that the world had ended. But then at a certain point, after Srila Govinda Maharaj leaving, it really hit me. And I think this was some years later, actually, it hit me that actually it's not that this is the end, but this is the beginning. This is actually the beginning, really. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he talks about along these lines, he speaks along these lines in Shri Guru and His Grace, that, now is the real time of test, that are we disciples in name only or are we true disciples? And so that really hit me at one point after Gurudev leaving, that, he left the way for us, right? He gave us the clue. He gave us some very good clue about how to move forward, how to progress. And he gave us the tools, he gave us the manual, he gave us the connections, he gave us everything, but he put it in our hands. And now we have to actually do the work. And, one thing I feel that was something unique about Srila Govinda Maharaj is that he really encourage us to take responsibility for our spiritual lives in a very individual and very personal way. I mean, in the sense that, we were discussing last night here in Hungary, there's often this tendency to lean on religion as a kind of crutch, and it can turn into a list of do's and don'ts. But with Srila Govinda Maharaj, that wasn't his style. It was more that he wanted us to go a little deeper in like actually taking responsibility for our spiritual lives ourselves. that I'm doing this because I want to. I'm doing this because this is what I want and this is what I need, not because this is what I'm supposed to do or this is what's right or this is what's wrong. But no, this is my own choice, and I'm using my own intelligence, my own inspiration to to move forward, to progress, you know, and ultimately doing it all as an expression of the heart, you know, doing everything in a heart-based way. So, you know, one thing he mentioned about you know, the way that he was trained when he was growing up, because he joined his guru's mission. He joined Srila Sridhar Maharaj's mission very young, right? He was 17 years old. And he said Srila Sridhar Maharaj trained everyone like this from the very beginning. You know, that, you know, they, you know, and Srila Sridhar Maharaj was very strict, right? And so there were many rules, and this, you know, the standard was very austere. But Gurudev said that he never felt that he was living in austerity or deprivation. You know, I mean, really, it was austere. Like he mentioned, like using a brick as a pillow. You know, and I think this was especially in the early days. The mat was very poor in the very early days. They would have this puffed rice mori with a few drops of mustard oil for breakfast, or they might use the old sugar globules that are used in homeopathy for sugar, and they would grow all their food. They had this one fruit, I think it was a type of fig they would use in sabji, um, but the tree was like always lined with these ants, and so the brahmacharis would all take turns to climb that tree, and they'd all get bitten, you know, and to get, you know, they lived like this, very, very austere. But Gurudev said, and of course, what to speak of the daily program, right? Waking early for the morning worship, for the arati service throughout the day, and so on. But Gurudev said that, you know, even though he lived in this very austere way, he said and Srila Sridhar Maharaj was strict and so on. He said he never felt that. And he always felt that, you know, everything was like all of these guidelines and regulations and standards, that they were all coming from his guru's heart, from his Guru Maharaj's heart, you know, and that he was following everything, you know, with affection, because he felt it was coming from affection. It was coming, these rules were coming from a place of affection. This austerity was coming from a place of affection. And so he was following with a mood of affection. And so Gurudev talked about that, you know, that we want to try to follow all of these things with the spirit of affection. And of course, you know, Gurudev is very famous for emphasizing that verse, Trinada, which everybody here knows, I think. Trinada pi sunichena tadoriva sahishuna amanina manadena kirtani sadahari. You know, to be humbler than a blade of grass, to be more tolerant than a tree, to give honor to others without expecting it for ourselves. Such a person is qualified to always chant the holy name. And so Gurudev was always speaking about this verse, and you know, the importance of treating one another with this type of spirit. But we can, if we really think about it, this verse is also an expression of affection. You know, it's about treating one another with love and affection. You know, this is also an expression of love and heart. And of course, you know, he emphasized so much, you know, trying to see one another through the lens of affection. Now I'm remembering actually how in particular, he spoke about this in regards to tolerance, because he pointed out, interestingly, that tolerance is the most difficult out of this humility, tolerance, and respect, because you can't, you know, you can fake humility, you know, you can pretend to be humble, And you can pretend to give honor to others, right? You can show honor, but then you're actually thinking something completely different, right? It's not too difficult to do that. But tolerance is not something you could fake, you know, because tolerance is something that will come in the moment, right? And you will be tested in the moment. You have it or you don't have it, you know. And so Gurudev mentioned that. And he also mentioned, and it's also a very interesting point, that it's the most difficult, but it's also the most important. Why? Because if we can practice tolerance, if we're successful in practicing tolerance, then it will lead to the other qualities, right? That if we're able to like take that pause and ignore our own ego reaction to some situation, to hold back on that, um, then it will give room for the qualities of humility and respect to come out. And he mentioned that, how tolerance will lead to the other qualities, and I thought about it a lot, and I realized it is really the case, because when we take that moment, and then it gives us time to reflect, right? And when we can have some real introspection, some inner reflection, then naturally we'll feel more appreciation for others, and we'll feel, more awareness of our own, how we could correct ourselves, right? If we take a moment to really reflect, right, through the gift of tolerance. So that was another interesting thing. But then the other thing which I was coming to is that he also mentioned that our tolerance must be with affection. Our tolerance must be with affection. And he pointed out that only if our tolerance is with affection will it be sustainable. That if we can tolerate with affection, then it will last. But otherwise, if we're tolerating in an artificial way, like clenching our teeth, tolerating something, we're going to explode, right? At one point or another, we're going to explode. But if we're tolerating someone or something with the spirit of affection, it can last, forever. There's no limit to that level of tolerance. And I was thinking the other day, how powerful love and affection is. Through love, our entire view of someone completely changes. Someone who the day before was, irritating us to the ends of the earth, the next moment, that same thing, we could see it as something charming. Someone has some annoying habit that's irritating us to death. But the next moment, if we see them through the lens of love and affection, then it might just be something humorous. It might be something charming. So it is really extraordinary. Gurudev also mentioned once when we were in Govardhan, Gurudev he often used to mention these three faculties of the soul, of willing, thinking, and feeling. It is also discussed in the scriptures. These are the three qualities or faculties of the soul. The ability to think. Actually, we can't do anything, right? This question sometimes comes up. What does it mean we're not the doer? We can't actually do anything. We can will, we can desire. We have that faculty. We can't actually do on our own. We're dependent on many other factors in the environment. Of course, primarily the Lord's divine will. But we can't actually do anything on our own. But we can will. So we have the willing aspect. The soul has the willing aspect, has the thinking aspect, and it also has the feeling aspect. And it's actually a very deep discussion, and these three aspects are also present in the highest absolute reality. But that's another conversation. And so once we were in Govardhan, this was 2008, and Gurudev, he used to mention this from time to time, right? These three aspects of the soul, and how ultimately we're trying to, express all of these aspects with a spiritual connection. Right now, these three faculties are coming through the filter of our mind and senses. We're projecting upon this mundane environment. But ultimately, our goal is that these three faculties will be expressed in connection with our, spiritual reality, with our spiritual identity, and so on, and relationship with Sri Krishna, right? But Gurudev, he made this point this time in Govardhan, saying that willing, feeling, and thinking. Feeling is really where we can what is stable. That's what he was saying. He was saying in terms of how we are approaching our devotional life. If we can attach ourselves from the feeling aspect, then we are in a stable position. If we can attach ourselves to our spiritual practice, our spiritual life with the feeling side of our existence, then we have a stable position in Krishna consciousness. And he was saying that, he said, thinking can fly. That was how he expressed it in his language. That he said, thinking can fly, meaning that it's not stable. If we're just connecting on a theoretical level, on a mental level, on a brain level, on an intellectual level, that's not stable. That's not a secure position to have. That's not a strong attachment. That may, we may run with that for some time. That may be juicy for some time, but eventually that gets dry, and our attachment can also dry up, right? So he said, thinking can fly. And he said, willing can also fly, right? Willing is like the doing aspect, or this ego aspect, that I am the doer. So there's a thinking that I know so much. I know this, I know that I understand this, I understand that. And then the willing is like that I can do this and I can do that. And I'm so capable and I'm so efficient and I'm so expert in doing this task or that task or this practice or that practice, right? That's also not stable. In other words, if our attachment to Krishna consciousness is within that aspect of what we can do, right? Of whatever it may be, we can do some grand service or whatever it is. If our attachment is through that, then that also can get dry, right? That also can fizzle up, or fizzle out, or whatever the expression is. That's not going to keep us going for a whole life. It is, there's going to be that ego rush that may last some years, that we're accomplishing so many things or we're so expert in this or that. But that's not going to be juicy enough to keep us riding our whole lives in Krishna consciousness, right? And I, in my limited time, admittedly, I've seen some very funny things, actually, like I've seen devotees fighting over getting to do some service, and that, oh, I want to do it, or I want to do it. And then in the end, nobody wants to do it. Anyway, don't want to go down that rabbit hole. And then I'm sure we've also seen persons who may have some ego about knowing so much, but that also, that didn't last, that fizzled out in the end. But anyway, we won't go down that rabbit hole either. But then Gurudev, this was his main point, the feeling aspect, right? Connecting through the feeling, through the heart. He said that is stable. If we have attachment to the heart, and we may not understand so much, and we may not be able to do so much, but we have some natural, simple attachment from the heart, that I love this, my heart is captured by this, you know, then that will keep us our whole life, that will keep us through this life and the next life. And that was one of Srila Govinda Maharaj's main teachings, I would say, to try to connect with this through the feeling, through the heart, through love, through affection. And that this is something that should pervade every aspect of our spiritual life. And how we're dealing with other practitioners, with love and affection, with some magnanimous, compassionate, loving view, right? And how we are trying to follow our own, the spirit with which we are approaching our own practice, with love and affection. Maybe, for example, going to chant our japa, we may not feel like it, we may not always understand why it's good for us, but we can think in a simple mood of affection, oh, my Gurudev asked me to do this, and he considers that it's good for me. And so I'm doing it, feeling some affection for my Guru. Or, now I'm not chanting the holy name, but I know the holy name has so much care for me. I know this holy name can purify me. I know this holy name can connect me with Krishna. I know this holy name is like some medicine I'm taking now. And so with affection, I'm going to take this holy name. With affection, I'm going to chant the holy name, right? And like this, in every aspect of our spiritual life, spiritual practice, spiritual relationships, this spirit, if this spirit of love and affection is pervading behind everything, then it puts us in a very strong position. So this was one of Srila Govinda Maharaj's main teachings. And for that reason, we see that name was chosen for his temple, his Samadhi Mandir, the temple of love and affection. And then the thing is, right, that, it's not only that he was preaching this, but he exuded this, right? He was living this in such a profound way, such a deep way. Oh, we have some nice comments here in the chat. He himself, and sometimes in ways that were very surprising, he would bring it back to that. He was always thinking from that plane of love and affection, beyond any other consideration. One example I think of, I think I've told this story so many times, but I think about it a lot. It was a story I heard from Swarnangi Didi in California, that at one time in Navadip, it was the time of Gurudev's appearance festival, his Vyasa Puja festival. And so many devotees gathered around the world to celebrate this great event. And there was some visiting sannyasi who happened to be in the temple at that time for some period, some days, and he didn't have so much regard for our guru. And so on that day, that was a big festival day, right? People traveled thousands of miles to be there. But this one gentleman, he didn't even go to give any respects or say hello or anything to our Gurudev. And our Gurudev was not bothered by that, but you can imagine, right? Many of the devotees in the temple, they were very upset. And so the next day in the morning, many of them were sitting in our Gurudev's quarters, and there was a bit of a hubbub. They were all talking about it, very upset, and then our Gurudev, he's hearing this, and then he said, this was his comment. He said, "It is the unfortunate person who cannot accept my affection. It is the unfortunate person who cannot accept my affection." And everyone there was so shocked. They were silenced because they were thinking in terms of respect, right? They were thinking in this way, oh, Srila Govinda Maharaj, he is the Acharya here, and this person is so disrespectful, he's dishonoring him. But our Gurudev wasn't thinking like that at all. His mood was, oh, I want to give affection to him. I want to exchange affection with him. But he's not interested. He doesn't want to receive that affection. And any consideration of ego or status or honor, that wasn't even a factor. That wasn't even a consideration on the table, you know. But so, he was always coming from that place of love and affection. We saw also so many times, he was a Paramahamsa, Srila Sridhar Maharaj referred to him like that. He is a natural Paramahamsa. He also said in many ways he is more than I am, Srila Sridhar Maharaj said. And this is one way in which we can appreciate that. Gurudev was so magnanimous in his dealings with persons from all over the world, and he overlooked, cultural differences and, considerations of proper, improper. He would receive all kinds of gifts, from persons. And he's just accepting the affection. He wasn't considering anything else. And always maintaining this very, humble and affectionate mood, with everyone that he came across. He was always in that identity of a servitor of his guru. That is, he was always living in that, that I'm a servant. He wrote that poem, right? Many of you have seen that. It's published in the back of our book, Revealed Truth. Ami Guru Das Nahi Anya. I'm a servant of my guru, nothing else. Not. That was his identity in every moment and every time and every circumstance. He was always living in that. And with these great souls, I mean, in general, I feel that you can really tell who someone is, not so much in the big moments or in the big statements or in the big actions, but in those little day-to-day things. In those little day-to-day, in those little micro actions that when nobody's looking, or when there's nobody around, that's when you can really tell, It's like that, like there's one expression I like, that you can judge a person not by how they treat their superiors or their seniors, but how they treat their inferiors, their juniors. That's how you can really tell, who someone is. And some of the things that impressed me the most about Srila Govinda Maharaj, they were those little things, those little moments that really like shook you up and made you think and made you realize what a great personality this was. And so many others had that experience also. Like another story I heard from Kumkum, Didi in California. Now she's living in Oregon. She's nearby Ash, I think. But she told me about this time. It was when the San Jose temple was going to be inaugurated. And they were sitting, and there were just a few devotees, just 2 or 3 devotees in the room, and someone was preparing the altar. And Gurudev was giving some instruction. So Gurudev was like sitting in the temple room, and Kumkum was there, and maybe one other person. And then there was someone else at the altar, like arranging the altar. And Srila Govinda Maharaj was giving some instruction to the person who was fixing the altar, but they didn't get his point. And they assumed they understood what he was saying. And they were telling Gurudev, it's okay, Gurudev, I got it. But they weren't really understanding. They were persisting with what they were doing. And Gurudev tried 2 or 3 times, saying, no, please do it like this. But they wouldn't listen. And then meanwhile, Kumkum's there, and she's, of course, getting very annoyed and upset. Oh, this person's not listening to Gurudev, and she's kind of getting a little upset. But then Gurudev, he tried to say something 2 or 3 times, and then finally he just sat back and he chuckled and he looked at Kumkum and he said, "Oh, what can I do? What can I do?" And that moment impressed her profoundly. because she just saw like this big contrast in how she was feeling, how Gurudev was dealing with the situation. And she saw like he didn't have any ego. Normally if we're in that type of situation, we'll start to get upset. We'll try to explain, no, you don't understand. This is what I'm trying to say. Can you listen to me? But Gurudev, he wasn't interested in just pushing an agenda. He wanted to have it wasn't just about, what I mean to say is it wasn't just about getting the job done. And that's another thing we can mention about Srila Govinda Maharaj that I feel is very prominent in the way that he gave instruction, that it was never about just getting the job done, but it was about your mood. The mood with which you did it was more important than what you actually accomplished. Like I remember now this other occasion. He was going to give initiation to someone, and I think it was second initiation, but this person had like a long beard and long hair, and everyone had been telling him, oh, you need to shave up, and I think Srila Govinda Maharaj had also told them that they needed to shave up. And then I can't remember the exact sequence of events, but then finally that person said, oh yes, I can shave, no problem. But then our Gurudev said to them finally, I know you're not attached to your long hair, so it's okay, you don't have to shave. Something like that, like just knowing that he was ready to do it if necessary. That was more important, than actually doing it. So that was another, I would say, prominent characteristic and teaching of Srila Govinda Maharaj, that, and again, going back to Trinada Piso Nichena, like how you're not how many rounds you're chanting, but what's the mood with which you're chanting? What's the mood with which you're treating your godbrothers and your godsisters? That's more important than how many rounds you've gotten done, right? Okay, you got the job done, but how many people did you step over in trying to do it, right? So how you do it, like you often come, you often see this in communities where devotees start fighting about different services that they're doing because they're focused on like the physical activity of the service. But that's not actually what it's about. It's about what's the lesson there, and how are you going to grow internally in your exchanges with each other. It's not about actually getting the job done. Like I heard from some of Srila Govinda Maharaj's personal servitors, sometimes Gurudev would be a little naughty and like kind of like he'd see the different dynamics. And especially as the years went by, his entourage got bigger and bigger because everybody wanted to have some personal service, right? And Ash's mother, she was one of the first secretaries and attendants of our Gurudev, and she has lots of stories. But sometimes our Gurudev would tease devotees. He'd see their natures, and sometimes there'd be some conflict, and he'd tease them in different ways and see how they would react. Like I heard one occasion, he asked someone to go in the kitchen to do something, and then a few minutes later, he asked someone else to go and do exactly the same thing. Just like to see, and then those two persons, they got into a bit of a quarrel, right? Because I mean, some of you won't believe some of the crazy things that happen, fighting over washing Gurudev's clothes, fighting over making his breakfast. Like it could be like real madness, I think when your mother was there, though, Ash, things were a lot more peaceful. She was there in the right time. No doubt there was some drama, but later on, as the group got bigger, there was so much competition and conflict that would go on. But he'd do like some like naughty things like that. Just see, how are they going to react? How are they going to harmonize in this situation? So this was another thing about Srila Govinda Maharaj, and I was talking about this a little last night in regards to how he accepted service from people. He wasn't thinking in terms of a human resources manual. He wasn't thinking in terms of, an efficient organizational model, for running a successful corporation. He wasn't thinking like that. He was thinking in terms of individuals, and I saw multiple occasions, multiple cases where, for example, someone was offering a donation, and for whatever reason, he didn't feel it was the right thing to take it from them, and he didn't accept it. I saw cases where persons were ready to give up their lives and join the temple, but for whatever reason, he didn't think it was appropriate for them. And no, not now, later, or no, this is not appropriate for you. He wasn't just trying to fill up his temples with the maximum number of persons, to fill up the bank accounts with the maximum amount of money. He wasn't thinking like that. He was thinking in terms of individuals and what's best for their spiritual life, right? In a very individual and a very personal way, and a very loving way, ultimately. So, going back to that incident that Kumkum shared, that, Gurudev wasn't able to convey, his desire to that devotee. And then he just chuckled and he let it go. Oh, what can I do? He wants to have a loving exchange. It's not just about getting the job done, but it's also about having an exchange and teaching something, sharing something with that person. And that, he's giving the instruction. It's not just that he's giving the instruction, but they're receiving it with affection. He's giving it, offering it with affection, and they're receiving it with affection. That was his, but if they don't want to engage in that way, then what's the point? Just let it be, just let it go. Then the conversation's over, and we were remembering last night this other incident I often mention, when he found out someone in the temple was stealing some money and he didn't say anything to them. And later on, that person brought it up with our Gurudev and apologized and asked for punishment. And our Gurudev just said, I don't have anything to say to you, because you're mature, senior devotee. You know what is right, what is wrong. So what can I tell you? You already know everything. There's nothing to say, You already know everything and you're still going on like that. Then what do I have to say, So this was, this was something very prominent in Srila Govinda Maharaj. She wanted us to come forward with our own heart, with our own desire. And this is very special because, we can think in this modern age, these are three very prominent great gurus, are Srila Govinda Maharaj, Srila Sridhar Maharaj, and Srila Swami Maharaj Prabhupada. And we can see they all had some unique contribution, and also phase. I also like to think of them as having different phases of instruction, in terms of how Krishna consciousness is being taught and presented in this modern age, right? Srila Swami Maharaj Prabhupada is the one who came and first introduced this, spread this widely throughout the world. He gave one phase of instruction. Then Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he came with another phase of instruction. And we can see that Srila Govinda Maharaj, he came with the final phase and bringing everything to a deeper level, actually. Bringing it to the plane of the heart, like how can we actually actualize this? And he mentioned this himself in one of his early talks during the First World Tour. There was one talk he gave in Florida, I think 1992, and he mentioned this himself. He said, Swami Maharaj Prabhupada, he came, he inundated the world with Krishna consciousness, and then my Guru Maharaj, Sridhar Maharaj, he came, he gave such profound explanations of what Krishna consciousness is. And then he said, and then you may question, what am I here for? What do I have to give? And then he spoke about these principles of humility, tolerance, respect, Trinada, peace, Unichena, and saying that, the devotees have heard so much about Krishna consciousness. They've received so much, and no doubt they're practicing so much, but how much have they actually moved forward in their spiritual life? How much has this really been realized within their hearts, and how much progress are they actually making? He said, this is the question. And he said, so I'm coming with the pot. He said it like that. I'm coming with the pot within which they can keep everything. Right. And that, and what is that pot? It is the pot of Chinada Pisu Nichena, Tadori Vasahishena, these principles of humility, tolerance, and respect. And he said, no, so this is my gift. And we can see that also in a broader way, that yes, these principles of humility, tolerance, respect, but in a broader way, this was what he emphasized and gave us. Like, how can we actually move forward with everything that we've received? And it's like he also used to say sometimes, if we need to cross a river, we don't need to know all the details about the chemical structure of the water and the pH of the water and the depth of the water and the speed of the wind and so on. We just need to know how to swim, right? We need to know how to get to the other side. And I feel that, this was Srila Govinda Maharaj's special contribution in the field of Gaudiya Vaishnavism in the modern age. How can we really move forward in a genuine way, not on the level just of the brain or in terms of our physical activity and practice, but really substantially from the innermost core of our being, like really genuinely move forward with this, and then in that regard, the primary instructions being these principles of humility, tolerance, respect, love and affection, and ultimately Sharanagati, fundamentally the spirit of surrender. And real surrender, that includes all of these things, right? Real surrender is coming from the plane of the heart. And naturally, all these other qualities are included within that. So what does it really mean to surrender? Srila Govinda Maharaj, as I also said, in his own life, he also exemplified that in the most beautiful way. It's, his example is actually quite unique if you think about it, in the sense that his whole life was a shining example of surrender. Because, if you like look by comparison in the case of Srila Sridhar Maharaj, Srila Swami Maharaj, of course, obviously they were fully surrendered souls, but their relationship with their guru in some ways was a little distant, right? Obviously, internally, they were fully surrendered and very deep in their connection with their guru, but that wasn't always apparent in a manifest way. But if you look at the life of Srila Govinda Maharaj, he joined his guru's ashram as a 17-year-old boy. He served him his whole life. And so his whole life is a shining example of the principles of surrender, the principles of Sharanagati. And so, his whole life, it's a very beautiful example for us. What does it mean to live as a surrendered soul? From the very beginning, joining as a 17-year-old boy and his guru asking him, can you follow me and not your mind? Like Srila Govinda Maharaj's whole life, it's like opening the pages of Chaitanya Charitamrita, opening the pages of our scriptures, and so many things we hear in his exchanges with his guru, you're thinking, oh, this is Bhagavad Gita lesson here, Bhagavad Gita lesson there, every aspect of his life, it was a teaching, exemplifying, living scripture, right? Sometimes the Vaishnavas are described in that way as the living Shastra, the living scripture, and his whole life was like that. And then, also he showed us how what it means to live in separation of Guru also, right? And how he remained faithful to his Guru in separation in such a glorious way, right? And taking so much responsibility on his head. He didn't want to take that position of Guru and Acharya of his Guru's mission. But Srila Sridhar Maharaj, pretty much forced him, and for 30 years he was asking our Gurudev to take sannyas, and then finally he told our Gurudev, I'll die, I will just die, I'll leave my body if you won't follow my request. And I'll close he didn't want anyone else to take care of his temple. He said, I'll close the temple, I'll give my deities to my godbrothers, and and I'll leave. But if you won't take this, nobody will take this responsibility. And so then our Gurudev, he finally accepted that, and he, in Bengal, they slaughter goats, right? It's a common practice that they, obviously not in our community, but in some other communities, goats are used as sacrifices in some rituals. And our Gurudev, he said, Guru Maharaj, I'm your goat. You can cut my neck or you can cut my tail. And I'm your surrendered soul. As you like, that it will be. And so finally, our Gurudev accepted that, and it was also by our Gurudev's earnest request that Srila Srila Maharaj accepted Western followers and Western disciples, because Srila Srila Maharaj initially, he'd given initiation to one or two Westerners, and then he was satisfied with that. He didn't want to grow his mission too much or take on too much, and he also, and one of his main considerations also was he was coming to the end of his days in this world, and so he told our Gurudev, who will take care of them? And then Srila Govinda Maharaj, he said, I will take care of them. He made that solemn promise. You please give them connection. They don't have any other shelter, and I will take care of them. That was Srila Govinda Maharaj's earnest plea and promise to Srila Sridhar Maharaj. I will take responsibility for them. And he did that until his last breath. He did that. And we saw that Srila Govinda Maharaj was, everything he did, it was for his guru. In every moment, there was nothing he did that wasn't for his guru. I mentioned, right, earlier, how we can often see in, these small moments or sudden moments also, unexpected moments, you can really see someone's character. And another thing I always remember, I've told this story also many times, when it was the Guru Purnima day, when traditionally one worships their guru, and we were in Calcutta, and it was this day of Guru Purnima, and our Gurudev had come down to the temple, and by his instruction, a large picture of his guru, Srila Sridhar Maharaj, was put up and was honored in the temple. But all of us there, we were so many disciples there, Westerners, Bengalis. We were all thinking this is the day to honor our guru, Srila Govinda Maharaj, and there was that spirit amongst all of us naturally. And then our Gurudev gave a talk glorifying his Guru Maharaj, and then we were going to do Guru Puja, and so someone had prepared an arati tray to do Guru Puja, and they were going to worship Srila Govinda Maharaj. And there were some occasions when our Gurudev accepted that worship, but on that particular occasion, and I was there by grace, our Gurudev, he actually became very upset, and he insisted that they had to do the worship to Srila Sridhar Maharaj's picture. And I always remember him like very angrily, like he would like threw out his arm, like pointing to his Guru Maharaj's picture and saying, no, you do the worship there. Very, very decisively, very, very firmly, he insisted, that worship was for his guru. And the way in which he, expressed that and made that movement, it made such a deep impression on me. And it was, such a clear statement about his mood, that everything he did was for his guru, and everything that he accepted, it was for his guru. Like he said once, I've made myself into a pratishta rocket, right? Pratishta, referring to honor, fame. Said, I cannot digest pratishta myself, but I've made myself into a rocket. He said, I'm sending it all to my guru. And really that was how he lived. And he traveled all over the world. He received so much honor, every corner of the globe, and he was received in such a honorable and loving way, by so many thousands of persons all over the world, from persons at all levels as well, from government officials, from the common folk, from everyone, from gangsters. He received, honor and love from all kinds of people. But we saw he maintained, his simplicity. Bhakti Dalita, she mentioned that, because she went to live in Navadvip very early, like around 91, and she was, she lived, close to him through the rest of our Gurudev's time in this world. And she said he didn't change, that, normally you would think, if someone, they start out very small and then they become this big famous person, you see how they change, right? How they're affected by that. But he said, Srila Govinda Maharaj, he always maintained his natural mood, his simplicity, his affection. That was very consistent in him. Obviously, his physical state, he's showing the aging process and so on, and things also changed because the crowds got bigger, so it became more difficult to be close to him. But he and his internal nature and how he reciprocated with people, he didn't change. He was very steady, very simple and natural in all of his exchanges with the devotees. And he always lived, as I said, he always lived in that mood of service to his guru. Very, very consistently. So, well, maybe I'll stop there. Happy to have this opportunity to share something and share appreciation of such a great personality as Srila Govinda Maharaj. And he is a divine personality, right? He's still alive. He's still with us. We can still connect with him and feel his presence in our lives. That is our good fortune, right? Through his devotees, through his teachings, through the grace of modern technology, we can hear his talks and see his videos, and that also helps us to feel a deeper relationship with him. It is a very real and very living thing. And this day is a day connected with some sadness, but it's also an opportunity to meditate. Yesterday, technically speaking, it's also a day to meditate more deeply on his divine character and his instructions for us, and to follow those clues that he laid out for us, and to move towards that bright reality and bright future that is waiting for us. As he used to say that, your future is very bright. He used to say that sometimes. And if we can follow his divine will and divine guidance, then we will come to experience that in our lives, that we will experience that bright and glorious future. Okay, well, I'm going to stop there for today. I don't know if anyone else wants to share any comments or anything at all before we close for today. And welcome everyone who joined, Somya Sham, and in the end, Somya Sham Mijai, Kanakalata, welcome everyone. Very grateful to have all of your good association.
Thank you, Vishaka Didi. I'm driving. My apologies. I'm taking with me the what is stable, the attachment, a stable attachment is thinking, feeling, willing. And also a tiny question, it doesn't matter the order, right? It's all equal, like thinking, willing,
No,
feeling, or feeling comes first.
right. No, the point that Gurudev was making in that comment, he was saying that, obviously the goal is to have our attachment with all of these three aspects, the thinking, the willing, and the feeling. We want all of these to be expressed in Krishna consciousness and attached with Krishna consciousness. But he was saying that the feeling aspect is the most important because the feeling aspect is the most steady, that the attachment that we have from the plane of the heart, that is the strongest, the deepest, and most stable um, attachment that we can have.
Joy.
It's like, I like this one expression I hear sometimes, that in the end, people won't remember so much what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel. That's one thing that's coming to mind right now. So that feeling aspect, and similarly in our lives, we may meet many people who impress us in many ways. They may impress us intellectually or physically, but it is those who touch our heart, that we will carry with us. And it may be for something very simple, but somehow or other they've touched our heart, and that is something we won't forget. That is something that will stay with us, right? That is the deepest. The heart represents the core of our existence. And so if we can connect our heart with Krishna consciousness, then nothing can move us. Nothing can move us from that. We will be our
Well, and devotion is a feeling.
right, right, right. Rightly said.
Thank you, Vishaka. That was very, very good to hear.
Right. Well, I didn't come in with any plan today. I was thinking maybe we'll go through questions, and then I thought, no, we have to say something. Actually, it's a little difficult to speak on the disappearance day. Part of me always wants to avoid it because there's on his appearance day, it's easier. There's more of a happy feeling, but when it's his disappearance day, I feel like hiding under the bed. But you know, then I think, no, we must say something. And then when you do, then you're always glad you did. And I'm very happy to have such good friends here where we can share these things, share these memories and appreciation. And all of this is just scratching the surface, right? Who Srila Govinda Maharaj was. Tungarasa says, religion of the heart. Yes, yes. Exactly. Religion of the Heart. And Gurudev loved that book so much and loved that title so much. It's Siddhanti Maharaj published, Religion of the Heart. Exactly, exactly. That's all we need. Actually, this whole talk was not necessary. It's Religion of the Heart. It just says it all, doesn't it? Thank you, Tungarasa. Jai Shri Bhakti Sundar Govinda Dev Goswami Maharaj ki Jai. Tadiya Tirobhav Mahamahotsavatiti ki Jai. All the assembled devotees, sincere seekers ki Jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki Jai. Jai Gaur Premanande. Hari Bol. See you all next time. Have a beautiful week, nourishing week in Krishna consciousness.
Shukta Vishakti Devadasi Ki Jai.
Joy.